Smalland is an open-world survival crafting game where you are very small. And that's honestly its best selling point. You are tiny. Here is a mushroom for comparison. This concept is applied to all aspects of a survival game. You are exploring this huge forest. For armor and weapon upgrades, you hunt beetles, bugs and bees. Saplings give you the resources to build shelters out of twigs and leaves. Storms are a dangerous force because you start freezing out there. The world design is definitely the star of the show. I like forests. Maybe I'm a bit basic for this, but when games offer multiple biomes to explore, then it's usually the standard forest that catches me the most. And Smalland absolutely delivers. You have a mix of lived-in areas, where the small folk inhabiting this world build pathways, but also the untamed wild of a forest. There are ponds with walkable lily pads, fast-flowing rivers and waterfalls, a mushroom forest. The world is amazing, and looks especially good when it rains, during nighttime when the fireflies come out, or when the seasons change so you get a completely different color palette. Autumn is my favorite. And there are more biomes than just the forest. But the forest makes up the largest part of the world. But the world isn't just beautiful. The concept of being small constantly comes up in gameplay. A dangerous river can be crossed with fallen branches. The world is very vertical because even the roots of a tree are a challenge to cross. I think open world as a game genre works the best when your traversal of the map is restricted in some way. When you have complete freedom of movement, then the gameplay becomes very dry very quickly. You're not really interacting with the world design in a meaningful way. It's just a distance that has to be crossed to actually get to the content. In Smalland, traversal of the map is the content. The world is constantly engaging you to come up with solutions for its challenges. Building a quick structure, wings to glide down, or the use of a mount. The great trees of the forest are ever-present landmarks, so it's excellent that they are an important aspect of the gameplay. And you actually get to climb them all the way to the top, which takes a decent amount of time. Up at the top, you have a very flat surface for your base. And because the treetops are all the same, the game has a feature to completely cut and paste your building from one tree to another, which is really impressive to me. You can access the transfer option at the base of the tree, and you can call a hot air balloon down, so you only have to do the long climb the very first time. After that, you can really just have a mobile base that travels around the world with you. Extremely convenient. But in our playthrough, we built the main base down in the world. Having a nice building is nothing without a good location and a great view. The flat treetop didn't do it for us. We still kept a temporary base up on the trees, with the basic necessities like storage chests. Building a base in the world is fantastic, because there's some very intentional design to allow for good building locations. Fallen trees serve as bridges over a river, and the man-made structures you can find in the world also have this intentional design. For example, a bench will have a broken-off plank that is now serving as a ramp. You can find these spots all over the world where the devs are just inviting you to build something cool. It's great. One tip I would give is to not build too close to enemy spawn locations. Your base would constantly get harassed. Maybe a buildable structure like a beacon that disables all spawn locations in the surrounding area would be a good addition. The actual mechanics of building are also incredible. You can place anything anywhere, so long as it connects to some sort of terrain and isn't colliding with an NPC area. You can snap objects next to each other and work with kind of a grid-based building style, or you can turn the snapping off and go freeform. Most objects can be scaled from half size to double size. And you have an advanced rotating option where you can rotate along 3 axes. The UI is a bit rough. It's kinda hard to see which axis you are currently changing, so it usually takes a bit of work. But the end results you can achieve are really good. Building is probably Smalland's most impressive aspect. I have a lot of fun with it, even with my very limited building skills. We are not making it out of the woods with this one. My only wish is for more options, both in decorations like armor stands and settings to change. For example, the scaling option only works for a few of the crafting stations. Some of them are huge, and it's hard to make them fit seamlessly into your build, without just resorting to a long row of all stations. The tannery in particular is too bulky, with its crafting table plus 2 skin racks at the sides. Next, I want to talk about the combat in this game. It is decent. You have light and heavy attacks, stamina management, and dodge rolls with iframes. Enemies have attack patterns with wind-ups and recovery. So far, nothing special. But what I find commendable is that they managed to make this combat work within the context of insect and reptile enemies. This type of combat is most often seen with humanoid enemies, but we are fighting bugs, and the animation work is really good. Ants will stand up and spread their mandibles far apart before snapping down on you. A wasp will lean back before thrusting its stinger forward. It's all very exaggerated, and I'm sure these animals wouldn't fight this way in real life. But for the context of this combat system, it works well. What I also like is that enemies are weak to different damage types: blunt, edged and piercing. The difference in damage is very significant, so you want to carry multiple weapon types with you. You can use your antenna sense to see the weakness of an enemy. And the damage number changes its color when you're matching the weakness, so you never have to guess. I like it, because it gives the game an element of preparation. My next goal is to venture into this part of the map to kill wasps for their stingers. So I'm gonna craft this spear for piercing damage. It also keeps the combat fresh, because you have an incentive to play around with many different weapon movesets, instead of just sticking to a single one. Now that being said, the combat system as a whole still isn't anything crazy. It's on a pretty small scale, and the indie game budget shows. Most enemies only have 2 different attacks. I think that's fine for the scope of the game though. One playthrough is like 20 to 30 hours. And the enemy variety is actually really good. More work could be put into the hit detection though. Some attacks can be zoned with positioning. For others, the entire bug turns into a hitbox, and you have to use iframes regardless of your position next to it. For more specific additions, I think a running attack would help the combat a lot. Enemies move around in a fight, but most of your attacks have very little forward momentum and will make you stop in place for the animation. This makes it awkward when you're trying to chase down a bug. You don't have a gap closer attack, so you have to run until you're within touching distance of the enemy, and then commit to your attack that keeps you stationary. You can kinda get around it by using light attacks during a jump, because the forward momentum of the jump still carries over into the attack. But that has a couple of downsides. You drain twice the amount of stamina because of the jump. Most enemies are on the ground, and so the jump attack can miss. And the forward momentum of a jump isn't that crazy. A running attack would be a better solution in my opinion. The balancing of some weapon movesets is also off. Here is the scythe weapon type for example. The first 2 strikes in the light attack chain are lightning fast, and then the third is a slower spinning move. In this case, a lot of games would have different motion values for the 3 strikes. The slow hit at the end should have the highest damage, but in Smalland it doesn't. They are all the same. So to reach the best damage output, you'd only commit to the first 2 strikes and never do the third. Most weapon types have something like that. A heavy attack with too much recovery, a light attack with too little forward momentum. Overall, the combat system is on a smaller scale. And then some options aren't even worth it, which leads to an even more limited system. Smalland is a survival crafting game, so resource gathering and upgrading equipment is a large aspect of it, and I like it for the most part. You have your standard progression jumps, like getting better weapons with higher damage, or better gathering tools to unlock new resources. The old resources also do not become obsolete, so you will actually experience the increase in gathering speed. I also like that you know where you can find a resource, because resource locations make sense. For resin, you have to look around the trees. For stones, you'll have to venture into anthill mines. When you want some honey, then you have to deal with the bees. You will have periods of gameplay where you are in a new high-level area gathering resources for the next upgrade, and likely getting clapped on by the enemies, before then making the upgrade and feeling the jump in power. It's satisfying. And there are also more significant upgrades you can make, like your first set of wings to allow you to glide, or new treats to get different pets. The gear progression in Smalland is pretty fun. One quality of life addition I would like to see is crafting stations having access to the resources from your chests. It's a very typical issue for survival games, spending too much time running between chests and crafting stations to make all the gear you want. Then there's also the leveling system of Smalland, which has a few issues. There's a cap of how much further one attribute can be compared to the others. In this example, I have 6 points to spend and could dump all of them into endurance if I wanted. But into my highest stat, constitution, I could only put 2 points. So you can't really min-max or have a very specialized build. Most characters are gonna have an even spread between 3 stats and will feel pretty similar to play. As for the specific attributes, intelligence is the only one that seems really bad. It allows you to craft equipment with higher stats. I respect my points to test it. 74 points spent into intelligence gave me a weapon that had a max damage of 22 instead of 20, an increase of 10%. You know what else I could do with those 74 upgrade points? Put them into strength for a flat 74% damage bonus on every weapon. Using intelligence to make good gear and then respecking your points into the more useful stats does not work, because you also need to have a high intelligence stat to repair that gear. I guess if you're playing with a larger group of people, then having one dedicated crafter supplying the team with strong equipment might be worth the point investment. But I think the bonus could be way higher. Or give intelligence an additional bonus, like consumables and ammunition costing less resources to make. Most survival game groups have someone playing the mom, and intelligence should be the stat to really benefit that playstyle. Crafting armor sets also feels lacking as a progression system. There's too little variety between them. The game has kinda swung back and forth on this issue as more updates came out. It used to be that gliding was only possible with certain armor sets, like bee or wasp armor. This was wildly unbalanced. The other sets couldn't compete. The world design is arguably balanced around having access to gliding, and using the glide to evade strong enemies is pretty significant too. Luckily, they disconnected gliding from armor sets, and the wings go into a separate equipment slot. Great change. But now we're kinda in the opposite camp, where the choice for your armor isn't important anymore. Armors of the same upgrade tier have the same defense values. The difference comes from extra stats like blunt damage resistance versus edged damage resistance. The values are already kinda small. 12% damage reduction for a full armor set. But the bigger issue is that you're not really controlling what type of damage you receive. That's on the enemy side. Edged versus piercing resistance? I don't know, I'm just gonna make the cooler looking armor or the one that is easier to make. That is probably the way most players are going to decide their armor. Gliding versus no gliding was too much, but there should be a larger gameplay impact. The bee and wasp armor could provide some resistance against the poison effect, or reduce the stamina consumption for gliding. The spider armor right now gives a very insignificant 8% movement speed bonus. Instead, it could speed up climbing animations or improve your dodge. Either more distance or more iframes. Heavy armor sets like the bone armor could honestly receive all of the damage resistance effects at the same time. Armor sets in general could provide damage increases for the specific weapon types, like bows, spears, hammers and such. Make it more of an RPG, where you can specialize your character into specific archetypes, like a fast rogue, high damaging ranger and tanky warrior. Right now, the most significant differences are the looks, which is lame. You go out of your way to farm a specific enemy type for their materials. It would be cool to embody some of the enemy's characteristics through the armor sets you make. Just a quick word on the story of Smalland. It is kinda whatever. The queen is sick, find a cure. It's told through NPC dialogue without voice acting. The story is just very functional. It gives you guidance for the NPCs and biomes you should travel to next. For me, this is not an issue. This is a game purely focused on gameplay. Having a bunch of cutscenes would probably get in the way of the exploration. In Smalland, you can also tame various animals. The process is very straightforward. You craft the correct treat, beat that bug into submission, and then feed it. Animals have levels, which you can see by using your antenna sense. So it might be worth it to go into a high level dangerous area to get a really good pet. Pets are great in Smalland. My only complaint is that the choices between them aren't balanced all that well. The 3 pets you can get very early into the game are the ladybug, gecko and grasshopper. The ladybug is like a mobile chest. It has 2 little pouches attached and can carry your stuff. Look at him go. The gecko got nothing special really. It's a bit faster than your running speed. and can help out in combat. The grasshopper has a charged jump that can skip entire sections of the map. Seriously, look how far it goes. That's almost 2 meters. The grasshopper is the clear winner. Right now, you can only have one pet following you in your party at the same time. But the roadmap for the future showed that they're planning to increase it. This would help the ladybug the most. Having them as your only pet with you is not really worth the extra storage space. A rideable mount has way more utility than that. And ladybugs are very expendable. Don't expect them to survive a long time. But if you could bring them along with your main pet, then that would be pretty good. The gecko and later on the spider should honestly get the ability to climb vertical surfaces at the cost of stamina. I think that level of utility is pretty equivalent to the grasshopper's big jump. Especially when you consider that you can glide down after climbing something tall. I want to repeat that I still really like the mounts. But it's a shame that for many of them the gameplay just holds them back. So they are not worth considering. For most of the game, the rate at which you can gain upgrades is good. It's not very grindy. But there are 2 cases of grinding I want to highlight. The final set of unlocks in the game is pretty rough. I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll keep it vague. The best mount in the game needs 500 of a specific resource. The enemies you kill for that resource drop them at a rate of 0 to 12 units per kill, depending on the specific enemy type and your luck. 3 is the most common drop. So roughly you'd need to kill 166 enemies. That is a staggering amount I would usually expect in a live service MMO type of video game. Not this comfy survival building game. There's another way to gather the resource through mining. But that comes out to mining 666 individual resource nodes at 3 pickaxe swings each. That's stupid. Killing the enemies is way more achievable. I think you could cut down the cost from 500 to 250. The second case is the faction system, which came with the most recent update as of making this video. You can align yourself to one of them and do timed events on the map to gather alignment points. Each event consists of killing around 10 enemies and gives you 6 points. All the items you can buy from factions are just different cosmetic versions of gear that you could also make yourself. The only thing that really affects gameplay is the perk at the end, which needs 1000 points to unlock. Here is some quick math. 6 points per event. Events spawn every 20 minutes, so you could do 3 events per hour, meaning 18 faction points per hour. To gain the perk, you need to do events for 56 hours. Luckily, this system can be safely ignored and the game doesn't feel like it's missing anything if you do. The perks at the end don't even seem that good. But you know, why have it in the game then? You could easily lower the rank up cost from 1000 points down to 100. I don't really understand what the thought process was in these 2 cases. If it was a subscription-based MMO, then there would be a monetary incentive to keep players playing longer. But this is mostly single player, maybe co-op with a few friends. The only revenue stream would be game sales, and perhaps selling merch. So it's best to make a fun game that people enjoy, and will recommend to others. No one is going to remember their time with the game more fondly if you make them grind. As we saw with the combat, leveling system, armor sets, mounts, and now the 2 cases of grinding, balancing in general is one of Smalland's biggest issues in my eyes. But that's nothing that can't be fixed. Overall, I do think Smalland is a fun game. And it's also funny. I don't know if that's just my humor, but insects are funny. When one of them spots you and starts stomping towards you on their little bug legs. Or the classic miscalculated grasshopper jump into a body of water. When you call them and they jump towards you all excited is also great. Any fight between 2 enemies is instantly funny to me. I once saw some bugs reenacting that scene from The Lion King. Whether you should play Smalland all comes down to how much the game's concept appeals to you. Smalland is a bit rough around the edges, but the concept is great, and the execution is really good too. It's why I highlighted the world design so early into the video. That's the main reason why someone should play this game. You're just a little guy in a huge sprawling forest fighting off the local bugs, and nesting yourself into the world with a base. I'm very much down for this concept, so I would recommend the game. I like it. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to see future content. Until then, goodbye.